Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. I take this opportunity to wish operators, viewers, and everyone a very successful and aptly peaceful 2019. As we begin our program, you might have noticed mischievously the name of the program, The Last Column of the Year. Let me tell you how I got that. It was a column written by Dr. David Hinds in the Kaicho News, and it was called The Last Column of the Year. David Hinds is a friend of this program, and David, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome back, and all the best for the new year.
Same to you, Chris, and thanks for having me again.
Now, David, you're a political scientist.
Yeah.
and an academic in that regard.
Right.
You teach in the United States of America. You like to apply your politics in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
Two countries that seem to be in a mess politically. One shut down, and one shut down but does no shut down.
Right, yeah. It makes the job. It makes the job of a political scientist very difficult because it's
good fodder though. It makes you think.
But it's difficult to predict politics on a day-to-day basis because things change so quickly, and sometimes you have these theories, these political theories, and you try to fit everything into those theories, and sometimes some countries just don't fit. I teach Caribbean politics. Whenever I teach Guyana, my students are always at a loss because Guyana doesn't fit neatly into most of the political theories that we teach, and especially at a time like this.
Is it because of our multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural?
That's part of it. There are other multi-ethnic societies around the world,
yes,
that are not as difficult and complex as Guyana. So even for multi-ethnic societies, we are really an exception to the rule.
But tell me about America first. Tell me about America. Government shut down.
My own view on America is America successfully has put out this narrative of itself as an exception. American exceptionalism. This doesn't happen here. We're not a banana republic. Dictatorship doesn't happen here, and so on and so forth. And I think what the present president has done is that he has shown the world that America is just like the rest of us in the world, right? Our constitutions look good on paper, but then you have a leader who comes up and defy and make a mess of all these constitutional things that you have there. So I think for me that is part of what is going on there in the United States. I think when Mr. Trump leaves, whether it's in 2 years or in 6 years, America will never be the same again. It's going to be very difficult to walk that back.
But it was said after Obama won power that America had crossed the racial divide. There would never be this kind of redneck contrasting with the liberal type of bifurcation of the society. It's gone right back.
Right. And I think that kind of optimism did not take into consideration the history of the United States. It was not, Obama's election was not the first time that America looked at race relations and take a couple of steps forward. If you go back to the Civil War period with the Civil Rights Amendment, the 13th Amendment, 14th, 15th Amendment, the Reconstruction period. But every time America did that, after that, it takes 2 steps forward, and they take 5 giant steps backward. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education, right, in 1954, for all intents and purposes.
That's the education, integration of schools.
Right. And then you come down to the 1960s with Johnson's Great Society program.
And the Civil Rights Act.
And the Voting Rights Act of 65 and Civil Rights Act of 64. But that was followed by the Southern strategy by the Republican Party, which is use race as as a means to capture all of the South and some of the North, and you win. So Obama's election was just one of the latest, albeit that it was significant because you're having a black president. But the backlash after that was inevitable. So we've gone from the high of Obama to the very low of what we have now.
Now let's come back to Ghana. You said in your column that last year, your year-end column was published in the Ghana Chronicle, and 2 months later, along with the column written by trade unionist Lincoln Lewis, it was removed by the powers that be from that newspaper, which they have treated as their personal property. First, I want to ask you about this final column. There seems to be something visceral about it, almost from the heart. How much emotionalism did you put into this column, David?
Well, gosh, I mean, I try to put emotionalism into all of my columns and all of my political conversation, partly because I don't see anything wrong with emotionalism. I think if those emotions capture the emotions of ordinary people, and I pay attention to what ordinary people are doing and what they're saying and how they're crying, and I try to reflect that whenever I express myself politically. But you are right, I wanted to make some very important points in this column because, like I said, Guyana is a very complex place. How could you be a supporter of the coalition but critical of the coalition? And I think we are grappling with that at this moment, as we have always grappled with it in Guyana. I think it's part of a failing, or post-colonial failing, is our inability to say, but I love you, but if you're doing something wrong, I ought to say to you with love that you're doing something wrong. And for me, that is the height of political maturity.
And development, yeah.
Right, and I'm so...
Is that realistic? Are you being naive there, David?
Well, no, I recognize that it is a difficult thing to do because you're dealing with human beings and you're dealing with human emotions and you're dealing with this ethnic thing and so forth. And it's difficult. But I think I've seen moments where our society embraced that praxis. I saw in the Rodney period.
The 2 steps forward and 5 steps backward?
We do that all the time. And so you constantly have to grapple with this. And what I wanted to say in that column is that I understand the emotions surrounding this government. A lot of it is ethnic emotions. We have the ethnic competition going on. But do I surrender to the worst in us? Or do I try, I think my responsibility is, do I try to drag people forward to say, even in this moment of complexity and emotions and so forth, dignity matters, you know? That you cannot look at our present government, as much as you love it, and say that it has acted in ways that we expected it to act. And you have to find a way to say, I love you, government, I gave you my vote, but you disappointed.
You said here, the last sentence of the 3rd paragraph, it was the 2nd time since they took power that the government removed me from a government agency for my independence. What was the first one?
I was appointed as a special assistant in the Ministry of Social Cohesion. And it lasted for 4 months. The very first criticism I made was against the 50% raise by the ministers. And once I did that, that was over. And it was a minister who stopped that, and that minister is very proud of doing that.
Now, so the 2nd time, it was your column in the Guyana Chronicle.
Yes.
Which it might be worth reminding, the PNCR, or the PNC, at the 1999 constitutional reform, said it was in favor of the abolition of all government parties based on the state media.
Yeah.
You campaigned, I believe,
Yeah.
for the APNU AFC
Yeah.
coalition in 2015. You were bitten once. You were writing your columns. You were removed by persons you considered your friends.
Yeah.
Are you hurt? Why I ask you about emotionalism is I'm inquiring whether your column is motivated perhaps by too much, that you become bitter now.
How much is too much? Bitterness doesn't come into this at all. You can say emotions, but bitterness doesn't.
But
come
it can go. It can get beyond.
Yeah, but ultimately, as I said in there, this is not about me. I'm okay. I'm okay, Chris. You just said that I have a job.
Yes, you do.
Right, I do. All right. Whatever motivated me was to say, how can whatever little talents I'm blessed with be put at the service of the people of this country through the government that we elected. All right? So it was not about me wanting some position. If I wanted to do that, I would resign my job and come like everybody else, form a party and try to be leader. All right?
And you get immediately into...
I have absolutely no interest in that. Absolutely no interest. The larger point I'm trying to alert the society to is the people our government moved against were not the enemies. I heard they're talking about Jack Dio, this and what the PPP did in 23 years. I want to tell our supporters, our government did absolutely nothing to level the playing field after 3.5 years. The people they moved against are their own. And that's the point I'm trying to make there. So you hear this propaganda now that African Guyanese should be warned about what the PPP did. Well, for 3.5 years, you were there. You didn't try to level the playing field. And now you want to use that narrative, that insofar as you use your power, you use it against people of your own who are trying to say to you, but no, you're a little wrong there. Don't do that.
You, in your column, you said you wanted, the objective of this column is to offer a perspective on Guyanese politics and society that veers away from party orthodoxy and dictates. That's high language. Break that down for me.
I come from a political tradition in our country and the region, the Caribbean region. They call it the radical tradition. But I come from a tradition that says that politics should not be an end in itself, political power, politics, but should be a means to an end. And that you must constantly critique the society that you live in so that you help that society to mature. In that sense...
That's the honorable kind of objective. For some people, politics is a gateway to control and getting of resources.
Of course, and but
you talk about different
my
kind
tradition,
of, yes.
which the modern pioneer of that tradition is the UC Guyana.
Yeah.
Walter Rodney came, he took it to another level, and I think I owe a responsibility to that tradition. That's what made me. From the time I was a child, I became socialized in that tradition, that aspect of Guyanese politics, and I think it's part of our national instinct also. There's something about Guyanese that tend to be fair, tend to be critical, and so forth. And I think that that tradition that I come out of, I owe a responsibility to ensure that that tradition continues to live. The last thing I want to see, Chris.
You were talking, I was asking about the explanation or simplification of party orthodoxy and dictates.
Yeah, party orthodoxy and dictates. Do not criticize the party.
Okay.
Do not criticize the leader. If something goes wrong, go in private and talk about it. Don't talk about it in public. You know, those kinds of things, which I call party orthodoxy, I don't subscribe to. And the tradition that I come from really frowns on that kind of politics. And so therefore, I try as much as possible to maintain that for young people to believe that you can live in a country, that you can be critical of your government and not fear for your life, or fear for your liberty, or fear that you'll lose your job. That's part of what I'm fighting for, because I think that's unfinished business as far as our post-colonial experience is concerned.
You also talked in the context of the clueless and the blind disciples, but said that those were not the ones you were speaking to, but the reasonable, the salt of the earth, the sufferers, and the enlightened. Give me the kind of people who we're talking about.
I think the majority of people in this country are. When I talk to vendors, when I talk to school teachers, when I talk to sugar workers who I don't get to speak to very often. But when I talk to people, I hear a reasonableness, all right? I hear a kind of integrity that comes from them. Now, a lot of times you get carried away by the nonsense that is written on Facebook. And that thing is the worst, and the kind of lawlessness on that place that sometimes you don't want to go there. But I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people that I meet on the street or meet me in the street in the marketplace, whenever I go to the market, whenever I'm sitting around in Buxton or wherever, who come up to me. And sometimes I myself am amazed at their ability to read the situation in this country and to be reasonable. To be reasonable, you know, David, you know, this no confidence thing, you know, it's unfortunate, but be leaders is hard. If you get a slight majority, why you don't try to make everybody happy? I hear that a lot. And so therefore I'm guided by that kind of reasonableness. And it is those people that I think I'm inspired by and who I try to inspire. That there is hope for this country once that instinct is alive, that reasonable instinct.
But you know, you say there's this hope for this country.
Yeah.
We've always been a nation of hope. We've been a nation of potential. We were on the cusp of greatness. And here comes one of the greatest threats to our democratic culture that are probably as bad as the 60s in terms of a threat.
Yeah. I think it's poor leadership, you know. Poor leadership, but we can't just say poor leadership and shut up. Because in many respects, that leadership will tell you that it embodies some of our own instincts. You know, I talk about the reasonable instinct, but there's also the unreasonable instinct. There's also the instinct that says it's you versus me, and that kind of thing.
That's the blind disciples and the group.
And I think our leaders veer too much in that direction. They don't embody more.
Is that the base? Is that the American version of the base?
Yes, it's the base, and in many regards, the base influences the leader, but the leaders themselves inspire that base to operate in a certain kind of way. And what I try to do every time,
which is leading from by the tail.
Yes. And what I try to do every time I write, every time I speak, is try to break that, because I think we're better than that. We are better than that. I know that.
We keep saying that. Why haven't we proved that we're better than that?
Well, you know, Chris, and it comes back to this kind of thing. I mean, part of the human instinct is survival, you know? And if people wrap up their survival is wrapped up in these ethnic, partisan, political positions, that's extremely powerful. And the leaders lead with that in mind, and the followers who know better, who express better, sometimes give the leaders, well, not sometimes, a lot of the times, gives the leaders a pass. Not because they support and they believe in what the leaders do, but it's part of the ethnic survival in instincts here and there.
David, I've known you a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
Since the late 80s, I think.
Yeah.
I've known Ogun saying, I consider you friends. I don't
Uh-huh.
care what people say. I always remember when we had problems in the, was it in the 90s, early this century. Ogun would call me in the evening and said, Chris, you all right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I
Yeah.
value that kind of thing. Yet, there is a labeling. Is like, in your own column, you call yourself a fierce defender of African Guyanese dignity.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish? How do you separate? How do you make that nuance expression to say that, look, I may be a fierce defender of African Guyanese dignity, but I am here to speak for the reasonable salt of the earth, the sufferers and the enlightened across Guyana society.
Yeah.
How do you face that?
Yeah, you deal with it every day, and you allow sometimes your actions to speak, you know?
Because if you appear too sympathetic to the other side,
Yeah. We have a way of saying anyone who is a fierce defender of their ethnic dignity, that they're racist.
Yes.
There is that kind of thing, and most of the time you end up having to defend yourself. I don't do that. I am an African Guyanese. African people have had a peculiar experience in the history of humanity. That experience shapes the way we look at the world, and that is something that has remained central to our instincts, has remained central to our narratives about ourselves and in the world. And I'm not about to abandon that. I mentioned two names, UC Kwayana and Walter Rodney, two of the finest public persons that we produce in this country, and they were probably more Africanist than I am. In fact, I learned my Africanism from them.
Yes.
But they were also very fierce Guyanese who believe in racial unity. In fact, Walter Rodney led what I would consider the most successful racial unity mass movement in this country.
only temporarily.
But yes, yeah. But what I'm saying, to do it temporarily as a man,
Even to break the mold.
Oh, of course. And so it is very difficult. But I am not playing games, right? I'm not coming to you and say black people this and black people that, so that Indian people would like me. I come to you and I say,
or vice versa.
Or vice versa. I'm not into that kind of game, right? I'm saying, yes, I'm a defender of African dignity, but when black people behave bad, as some of them did in Buxton, three of us, UC Kwayana and I and myself, three
Yes.
public people, came out and said, no, you're wrong. You cannot be killing people because they're Indian. Judge me by that. You know?
Yeah.
Judge me by that. Judge me that here I am, fierce defender of African dignity, but when Indian dignity and Indian lives are threatened by my own people, I put my hand up and say no.
Yes.
And
you've done it.
And in those days we risk our lives.
Yes.
We risk our lives. So yes. So judge me on that ultimately.
Now, in your column, you said, as a fierce defender of African Guyanese dignity, I must urge some toning down of the rhetoric. And in this case, you were referring to the particular situation, Charandas being described as a traitor and Judas, and the masses, the Guyanese supporters, Indian Guyanese traitors. Is anyone really listening, David?
Well, I hope they are, and that's what keeps me going, because no, I hope they are. I hope they are. You know, one gentleman came up to me, young man, came up to me and he said, David, you know those traitors, and I listened to him respectfully,
Of course.
and so forth. And when he was finished, I said, well, you know, I am going to write about what you're telling me in my column this week. You know, I saw him a few days after the column. He said, you know, you have a point. You know, it's not about the traitors, although there was a traitor on board. It's bigger than that. And so I think I got through to that one person who was very rabid about this Indian man in our midst, who is his Judas and so forth. But do I think...
You're not endorsing those terms.
No. I'm just telling you what he's saying.
Yes.
And I chose to deal with it here. He read my column.
Yes.
And then he came back to me and he said, look, I see your point. So the question you're asking, is anybody listening?
Listening.
Maybe there are one or two or three. What do Christians say when one or two or three are gathered, and so on and so forth? I don't mind if it's one or two or three.
You're then it's Sunday school, David. By the way, let me ask you, how was Christmas for you? Was it traditional?
No, I didn't feel this Christmas.
Did this vote and no confidence have anything to do with it?
Maybe.
Because you come from a community that really, if you talk about traditional Guyana and traditional Guyanese Christmas, that's where it is.
It was there, but people were talking about the vote of no confidence. You know? I mean, it's not David, let me take a drink, or the usual thing, piece of black cake, there and so on. But what people really wanted to talk about during this Christmas period was this thing. And so I think it put a cloud over the traditional Christmas. And I think people are anxious for Christmas to be over and for us to settle this mess that we have found ourselves in.
Well, are we settling it?
Well, we have to settle it. I think it has gotten to where it has gotten, right? And it has gotten to the point where the government side has decided to invoke its right to review. And although that in that process of reviewing is pregnant with a lot of ethnic consequences, potential ethnic consequences, potential, maybe, some people argue, constitutional consequences and so forth, they've opted to exercise their right to review.
David, democracy isn't settled in the court. Democracy is settled by reasonable exchanges and people accepting consequences that are sometimes messy.
Yeah.
So I gave an example. I did a letter for the Sabbath News today.
Yeah, which I saw.
When Callahan, not even by a special majority, just a voting majority, lost by one vote, he announced immediately that he didn't use the word resign, but he said, but he went next morning to the Queen and said, this is in the British Parliament. Isn't that what we ought to be doing as a democratic society?
Yes, that's where we ought to be. But our road to that point of democratic behavior, our road today is a very stormy road. The British themselves did not arrive at that democratic
overnight. Of course.
You know, it took them centuries.
You had Cromwell and we
chop off the king head and all kind of story. You know,
and the king chop off the wife's head.
And it's all kind of stuff.
No, but we have had the benefit of learning from those experiences.
Yeah.
We are faced, David, with a major power. Venezuela, which is in turmoil and would love to create some distractions. We are engaged on the pursuit of an economic program that essentially is going to be driven by foreign investors. Some of this, many of these, have serious consequences. We as a professional firm are being asked, well, what does this mean? Where is this going? Isn't there another way that we ought to be? President Granger said, I will respect the Constitution. Moses Nagamutu, Prime Minister, said, you may not like democracy, that's how it works. We seem to have backed away from that.
You mean the coalition seems to have backed away from that? Yes. And they've invoked what I call the right to review. And that's where we are at the moment. And that's the point I'm making, that when we speak about democracy in Guyana, it cannot be the kind of democracy that the British practices, or in some cases the Americans. It has to be a democracy that's born out of our own dynamics. I truly believe that when we are at these moments, it is the bipartisan consensus that will take us out of here,
rather than the legal thing.
Well,
you go to the court. Let's say there's a black judge or an Indian judge straight away. Everything gets clouded by race. That's it.
And that's it. And therefore, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes the institutions the courts or the other institutions in society, in a sense, are compromised by this ethnic thing that we've gotten caught up in, and so therefore is the maturity of the leaders. My own view to solve this, because I think if we go down the road of them versus us, which we seem to be going down the road, seem to be doing, the PPP saying you've lost the vote of no confidence, get out of here. The other side is saying, no, we have a right to review, and they're reviewing. We've set ourselves there up for a collision. One side is ultimately going to win, one side is ultimately going to lose. It's going to have consequences.
Or maybe both sides lose.
Well, in the end, all of us lose in the larger scheme of things.
Yes.
Right? And so I think here is an opportunity once again for the top leaders to really sit down and solve it. I think that's where it's going to be solved. So I think the responsibility is whether they have the maturity to do it is another matter. In fairness, Mr. Jack Dio has been quite conciliatory since the passage.
And so has
and
President Granger said.
President Granger initially, and the Prime Minister came out and so on. So I think there is a window there for us to work something out where both sides can walk away from this without once again we being put at the edge of the water. This is the worst time. This is the worst time to be put at the edge of the water because of the enormous oil wealth that is sitting out there, the global situation with Venezuela at the back here. America is investing a lot of money, so there are consequences.
And Russia showing
an interest and so on. This is not a time for us to be locked in this struggle internally. So I would say the leaders have to get together and to come up with a solution in which both sides can have a stake.
Leadership calls for values. It also calls for courage. Well, one of those values. Our experience in Ghana, leaders sometimes are afraid of their own base. I mean, take the U.S.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Trump was going all along until Ann Coulter attacked him.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about leaders that sometimes they become afraid of their own followers? That's strictly to your thing now, political scientist.
Yeah, because ultimately it's your followers who vote for you. That's the easy answer. I think in Guyana, I don't think the leaders are so much afraid of their followers. I think both leadership, the PPP and the PNC, they've really dealt their followers some bad hands, right? So I don't think they're afraid of their followers as much as they're afraid of losing power. I think our leaders in Guyana are preoccupied with power as an end in itself, and sometimes they screw their own supporters in order to remain in power. I happen to believe that this government, which I think has scored well when it comes to things like human rights and so on, I always say that, and I wonder why they don't use it much, that compared to the PPP regime and the PNC regime before, they have a better record on human rights. I mean, they've done some stuff.
Local government elections are not a very positive.
Right, positive thing. So here is a government that I think in many regards can stand up and say we're a reasonable government. But when you look at the way in which they've used power, give myself 50% raise. There's no economic sense in it. There's no political sense in it. I did it because I could do it.
Yes. I have no apologies to make.
I have no apologies to make, right? And I think that's the problem that we face in Guyana and perhaps in the rest of the Caribbean. They're less than us. Is the question of people being in love with power. I mean, people come to me, David, why don't you make peace with these people? What do you want? People asking us ridiculous questions. What do you want? Because that's how they see, right?
That's what politics is all about.
Oh, right. And I think that's part of the problem, a big part of the problem with governance here in this country.
In this your last column, you were particularly harsh on the government.
Yeah.
You talk about the ineptitude and the collusion of the government in its own demise.
Yeah.
You talked about it must be said that the government betrayed the trust of its own supporters who cannot point to any benefits for them beyond a few handouts here and there. Pretty harsh judgment.
But true. I mean, if it were different, I would have said so. It's truth, and I think political morality is important. I learned that from AUC Quayana, right? That somewhere one has to be honest, and if they're not prepared to say it, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it as someone who was in proximity to the leadership and so on and so forth. And I'm going to say it, that yes, there's certain things you put on paper. Dr. King said, America, be true to what you put on paper. Right? When he referred to all that lofty thing that Americans have in the preamble and so on. And I'm saying we were not true to what we put on paper. And one of the reasons I say that very seriously is that my party, my small party, played a big role in putting that on paper. A lot of the policies that we put in the manifesto and on the platform were policies that the WPA was very instrumental in shaping. And so I have a personal stake from a political standpoint, from a partisan standpoint.
Is it then
Yeah.
that maybe the WPA was not sufficiently mindful that, look, it is putting out its ideals,
Yes.
but you weren't certain that the PNCR
Yeah.
or the AFC
Yeah.
was going to buy into those ideals?
No, we were never certain, but one was always hoping that, look, we were trying to project something new. We were trying to put something new before the Guyanese people. They gave us a chance to solve some of these problems and so forth. And we felt that we had to give our partners a chance to demonstrate that they themselves were cognizant of the change in society. But unfortunately, they weren't. And so we cannot look at that manifesto and say that we have delivered on even 10% of what we promised in that manifesto. The big issue: no wage policy, no constitutional reform. You know, we've done reasonably well in terms of infrastructure. All governments. I mean, the Nazi had some of the best infrastructure.
If you spend that kind of billions of dollars,
yeah. But on real big issues that are going to make a qualitative difference in people's lives, we have failed miserably. And I think if you're going to go back to people and ask them to give you another chance, you've got to level with them on what they know. They know that we failed. So to go to them and to pretend otherwise, I think is dishonest. And so if the government is not saying it, I'm going to say it.
now, you said the complaints from the supporters are many, and by now should be well known to the leaders. Does the WPA accept some of the responsibility for the failings of
Oh, well,
this?
certainly. I mean, once we signed up and we became part of this thing, we've got to accept the responsibility. There's some truth, and the truth is that we were not part of the decision making. But at the institutional level, we're part of the government. And so, therefore, you've got to take responsibility. And we take full responsibility as part of the collective.
But taking responsibility is one thing.
Yeah.
Doing something about it. What's the WPA doing to say to your colleagues in the government, look, we have betrayed. And I'm not suggesting that you are speaking for the WPA, but at least it seems to be a view. Betrayed the trust of our supporters. We have to get back on track.
Our colleagues don't listen to us. They think we are a small party. As they say, we bring nothing to the table. They behave in an ungrateful way towards us because we brought a lot to the table. But in their estimation, if you're not a big party, then you're disrespected. So it is because our colleagues don't listen to us that we have to speak to other people. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to say to the people, this is it. But our colleagues don't listen to us. I mean, it's part of the failure of this government. Its inability to engage in consensus and discourse and consultation. Oh, it's been poor. Very, very poor. You're talking about an APNU that has not met in a year. And this was after the 2017.
That itself is anti-democratic.
Yes, I mean 2017, after we got into that big fight over Dr. Rupnaraine's removal, we met at emergency meetings and we vowed we are going to do better. We agreed that the APNU will meet every 3 months. The first meeting we were supposed to have had, one party said that they're busy doing their anniversary, they can't meet, you know. And so for 2018, we didn't meet only once, January of 2018, until recently last week, Thursday.
I think you use in your article arrogance, the word arrogance.
Oh God. No, arrogance is part of human instinct, but and we in post-colonial societies, our leaders have a certain degree of arrogance. But no, this government takes the cake. Burnham government was authoritarian. Jack Dio government was authoritarian, but I don't think they were arrogant in the same way. I think they still had empathy for their supporters. They still treated people who supported them with a certain kind of dignity. You hear stories of these people, ministers who you could have called 10, 15 times a day. They were in power for 3 years and you couldn't get through to them. You know, they became part. You know, you hear about them driving down the street with big siren. They got more siren than the Queen, and so on. You know, the way in which they use. Oh no, they were arrogant. They're arrogant, and you know, when you're that arrogant, you lose touch with people very, very quickly. Now, I can, as a scholar, I can engage in all the analysis that explains the arrogance. Part of it, I think, has to do with the fact that they weren't prepared for government. There's some people, they weren't prepared. A lot of these people in the government never hold a placard.
Yeah.
They never struggle for this power. You know? They never, right? And so that explains part of their misuse of the power and so on. But it doesn't excuse it. It doesn't excuse, because you live in a society and you're supposed to have respect for people and don't behave in that kind of way. That power is not yours. It is not yours. There are people, ordinary people, who sacrifice for that. And you are there and you behave in that way. No. Oh.
Apart from arrogance, you also spoke of the incompetence.
Yeah.
Those are harsh words of your own, of the government you support.
No. Gosh, man. I go back to Burnham. When you look at Burnham cabinet, you had Fred Wills and Shahabuddin and all those
Vincent Tika
and all those people who, you know, understood politics, understood political theory, understood society in a certain way, and so forth. And so you had a quality of governance. Oh, I'm not saying that I fought Burnham, right? You know, I mean, they were authoritarian, but I'm talking here
to the extent of, your liberty.
Right. I'm talking here about your ability to govern and your ability to use whatever power that you had at your disposal in order to do something. I mean, so this government, I think, they were so unprepared, and that
that's a term. You never have I seen a group so unprepared for government.
They literally went and picked people up from nowhere, put them in the government. And so in a sense, I sympathize with those people, because they didn't put themselves there, right? Those who put them ought to know better. Look, running a country is not...
not running a legal practice, not running a...
No. Yeah, running a government in 2018 is serious business. And you need serious people. And I'm not saying that people without experience should not be given a chance to get experience, but you have to come through the ranks. You don't pick somebody up from somewhere who had nothing to do with nothing, as they would say in the villages, right? And then tell them, look, run the country. And I think we suffered. And people are saying that. Ordinary people are saying that. People in the second level leadership of the parties are saying that. But a lot of them don't want to say it publicly. I'm saying it publicly.
Were you surprised in the results of the local government elections?
No. Oh, I knew that. Oh, I knew that, Chris. I knew that. I knew that. And I felt it was a mistake to go to those elections, first of all, as APNU and AFC separately. I think that was a major error. Now, had they gone together, they would have done a little bit different, a little bit better. They would still have been beaten, but it would not have been so badly.
So, I mean, you're raising some very harsh criticisms. Arrogance, incompetence, lack of political judgment,
yes,
questionable leadership.
Yes.
That's like saying you're not fit to govern.
And I want to stop short of saying that. All right?
But add the four together.
Yeah. I want to stop short of doing that, only because I feel that they could do better. That they could do better.
After all you've seen?
Yes. I think, and this is why I believe, if you're humble, and you let humility take its course, you're going to be able to pull this back. And I think that if the leadership is broadened, you see, the other thing about all this incompetence is concentrated among, the only thing that functioned in the coalition was the cabinet. There was no other council outside of that. Views could not. Sharon Das said that. He said that. I felt like a yes man. And people are, this is what disappoints me with this name calling about trait and so on. Because people, the society out there is not give them a chance to examine the ways and means in which the government itself, the top leadership, enabled that kind of thing. You know? People in the, when I listened to Sharon Das, I heard myself. Right? Except that I wasn't in Parliament, and if I was in Parliament, I was not going to be a yes man. And then they would have kicked me out. All right? Okay?
As you've been kicked out, right?
I've been kicked out because I'm not a yes man. But that's what they demand of you, that you may be a yes man. And a big man who, you know, is a lawyer, you know, is in touch with people, and you ask that man, all I want you to do is to say yes. That is an assault on people's integrity and dignity in this day and age. In your last column, you spoke about the government being pushed into uncharted waters. Yeah.
There wasn't a no confidence motion, but it was never it never went to a vote against the Ramatara administration. But you correctly point out that it's the first time we've had to deal with a successful no confidence motion. You suggested that you talked about rejoicing at their fall, and you acknowledge that they have lost. Yet you said in one of the paragraphs, you talked about government and perhaps its contingent parties seem to be looking at legal loopholes as a route to overturning the vote. Both sides are on solid ground, it seems. You're saying both sides on solid grounds. The PPP, which brought this successful no confidence motion, and the constituent parties, which are looking for legal loopholes.
Yes.
From your, given that you've had the time from the 21st of December to now, there has been a fair amount of writing and discussions, television programs. This column was written on what date?
Last Friday.
Last Friday.
Right.
So you would have. So
I would have had a week.
Yes.
A week,
so you're talking about their fall. Is there a contradiction? You're saying both sides have solid grounds, but you're talking about their fall.
Right. No, I acknowledge that when you come to a thing like a successful no confidence motion that will topple our government, this is Guyana. It ain't going to happen like it happened in England. I am cognizant of that. And so therefore I'm saying it as the young people say, it is what it is. We have been dealt this hand. And so therefore I expect both sides are going to find a way to dig in on their positions. I accept that.
How does this affect the 90 days by which elections must be held?
Well, if you go to the court, I suppose unless they hear those matters quite expeditiously, we're going to fall outside of the 90 days. And I think for the government the challenge is how do you present a narrative that says I am reviewing this not to stay in power but to ensure that democracy is served. And I think that narrative has slipped away from. But
we've also had lots of cases,
yeah,
where things are challenged.
Yeah.
But a challenge, lawyers love to put it,
yeah, yeah,
does not operate as a stay, even if it's an appeal.
Right. Yeah.
And the law says yes.
Yeah.
The government falls.
Yes.
It resign means to leave voluntarily.
Yes.
And so that you can't get by way of the back door, which you can't get openly.
Right.
You can't use this challenge. And you know, David and viewers, we talk about this right, but there's also known in law an abuse of process.
Yes. Yeah.
So you really are stalling. A lot hinges then again on the leadership. President Granger, unfortunately, is not in the best of health at this stage.
Yeah.
What kind of leadership does it call for this?
As I said, it calls for mature leadership. And Chris,
But mature and courageous.
Yeah, and courageous. No. Look, I hear you there on the legal imperatives here, and I completely agree with them. But we live in the kind of society that is not ultimately governed in these sensitive matters. Now, look, if this thing is overturned, Indian Guyanese are going to say once again, this is what these people are doing to us, and they will put it in ethnic terms.
Especially if it's a black judge.
Right. But if this government walked away without a challenge, African Guyanese, including reasonable ones, will say, you see, the Indian people betray we. Either way, people are going to be, and that's the point I'm driving at there, that ultimately this has to be a political solution. No, I'm not saying to ignore the law and the constitution and all of those things. I think those things are there, are very clear, right? But the reality, ethnic reality, stares us in our face, and we have to be creative about it.
Now, we have not a lot of time left, David. You have identified for Carl Greenwich to be brought into the center of the coalition, for Vincent Alexander, Robert Corbyn, Aubrey Norton, Nigel Hughes. Some of the very people who are calling PPP leaders thieves.
Yeah.
Are you being naive to expect a coalition? Of course, anything can happen. That you call me thief today, publicly, and tell me I must sit around the table with you tomorrow.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, It's always a challenge. I mean, it's what politics are, right? It happens. I mean, who the WPA and the PNC of all parties, post-colonial history. There were no two other parties that really fought each other at a certain level, and they sat around the table and brought around the APNU and brought the APNU, AFC thing into being. And I think that's part of our challenge.
In terms of our maturity, do you think we've we've reached here?
I'm mixed on that. No, the short answer to that is no. The long answer is that there are moments when we have showed maturity, and if we have the presence of mind to draw on those moments, I think we can see this through.
Let me ask you, you know, we, as we get older, we get mellow, and you say here, if the coalition does not apologize to their supporters for failing them, broaden the leadership to include others, and pledge to do better if given another chance. You then went on to say they will not get your support. And you described, that's my line in the sand. Now, are you being not only unrealistic, David, but naive, downright naive, in hoping for the coalition to apologize to their supporters?
No, I think they will do it. They're not going to do it in the way David Hinds tell them to do it. They will do it, Chris. I am telling you. But they're not going to do it.
What leads to this optimism, David?
I think ultimately it's the power thing, eh? They're not going to do it out of sincerity because it comes from the heart. They're going to do it. Once they see it as a route to power, they're going to do it. They're going to go to Anns Grove and go to Buxton and go to them African Guyanese village, and they're going to say it quietly there. They are less likely to say it in a big statement, but they are going to do it, because part of saying it in a big statement, they're going to say, well, David Hinds, they said to do it, and they will never ever appear to be one to say David Hinds was right. These are reasonable things. I don't see the leadership has to be broadened, because that pressure is coming.
What do you mean by the leadership has to be broadened? Are you saying bringing the PPP in today?
No. I'm talking at the level of the coalition. I'm talking about the level of the coalition. It has to be broadened. There were some of those names that I mentioned there are people who the coalition marginalized. And now, if you notice, for example, at the level of the PNC, Aubrey Norton, as now, was on a PNC press conference the other day. You know, I mean, they're recognizing that there are people with certain skills, and I'm not. People may have their baggage and so on and so forth. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people with political skills. All right, people who feel for ordinary people down there. You can say what you like about the Corbins and the Nortons and so on. They do feel for people in a way that a lot of the people in the government don't feel for people. And so it is that I'm talking about.
David, on that note, the operators just signaled.
I know it's gone already.
Yes. Well, it's less than an hour.
Right.
A few minutes.
Yeah.
I really did enjoy this discussion. Thank you. Always great to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.
I know you're heading back. All a safe trip, and we'll see you when you get back.
I'm always here.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night, and I'll see you next week.